The preferred method for storing and exchanging data is the JSON format. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the basics of JSON, since this is important to know, as it is the structure that is used for storing and exchanging data. First off, let's talk about what JSON stands for. Now, JSON was built off of the JavaScript object notation. So, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. As you can see, the letters J, S, O, and N were taken from that phrase. Now, some of the characteristics of JSON that are important to understand are these. First off, JSON is text, structured like a JavaScript object. So it's not a JavaScript object. It's simply text. But the way it's structured allows us to easily convert that to a JavaScript object. That's an important point to remember, because text is one of the formats that you're able to exchange with other systems. That is accepted. And so that's why that's important, that JSON is text. As mentioned, JSON is used to store and exchange data. Basically, another way to phrase this is you can store a JavaScript object as text. Now think about that concept. Think about the power of what that implies. If we can take a JavaScript object and store it permanently as text, that gives us ability to do things that we haven't been able to do otherwise. Now, you can convert JavaScript objects to a JSON string of text using a stringify method, and you can do the reverse. Convert a JSON string to a JavaScript object using the parse method. Now, both of these methods, stringify and parse, are a part of the JavaScript JSON object. Now, you know about the date object in JavaScript and the math object in JavaScript. Well, another object that is available is the JSON object, and it contains the methods stringify and parse, which allow us to move between the JSON format and a JavaScript object. Okay, let's take a look at a quick and simple example. I'm going to open the console. And I'm going to create a simple string and assign it to the variable. But this string is going to be formatted using JSON. Now you're going to recognize some of the syntax used within JSON. Notice the curly braces, notice the colon, notice the name value pair. That looks very similar to JavaScript object notation, but this is really a string of text. Now, one thing you will notice that's different with the JavaScript object, the name portion of the name value pair doesn't require quotes around it, but it does in JSON. But we'll cover that when we cover the syntax in more detail. Now, let me go ahead and press return, and then I'll just display that. Looks exactly like what we typed it in. It is a string. But now let's look at how we would convert that to a JavaScript object. So I'm going to assign it to a variable obj. Now we need to access the JSON object and the parse method of the JSON object. And then we pass in the string, the text string that we want to convert. I go ahead and press return. And now look at what we can do. obj.name. We can access it just like an object, because it is an object. It converted that JSON string into an object. So very powerful idea for transmitting data back and forth. Now let's go the opposite direction. obj is an object. Let's convert it back to a string. Once again, we access the JSON object. .stringify is the method used to convert it back. obj is the object we pass in. Press return and display str, and now that is in the string format. Now, if we wanted to include more than one name value pair, we would separate them with a comma. So here's the first name value pair. Second name value pair we separate with a comma. Whoops, I forgot my assignment operator. Let me press the up arrow, go back and add that. Now str1 is a string, and we can convert it to an object using json.parse. str1 is what we want to pass in, and there's our object. Now we have first name and last name is associated with that object. All right, let's take a look at the syntax for the JSON format. First off, data is in name value pairs, separated by a colon. We've seen that. But all data must have a name value pair. And the name must be enclosed in double quotes. Now that's a very important point, because that is not required when creating an object in JavaScript, but it is required in the JSON format. Now, data is separated by commas, so as you have multiple name value pairs, you need to separate those with commas. Curly braces indicate an object. So you use curly braces around the outside to indicate that it's an object. But if you have objects inside of that object, you need to use curly braces to indicate those objects as well. Square brackets hold arrays. So if you want to indicate an array, you do that with a square bracket. All right, let's take a look at a more complex example. I'm going to jump to Sublime for that example. And I'm going to copy in some code. This is a JavaScript object that I've created. As you can see, it's a pretty complex JavaScript object. We have one name value pair that has a number, another that has a Boolean, and a third that has an array. Inside of that array are multiple objects. And you can see what the attributes of those multiple objects contain. So pretty complex object. Let's convert that to JSON text. So I'm going to assign it to a variable. JSON text equals access the JSON object, stringify, and pass in obj. Then I'm going to log that to the console so we can take a look. Save that. Let's refresh and open the console. Here is that object converted to JSON text. Now, as you can see, when you start getting large objects that you want to represent in text, it can be pretty difficult to type out if you have to do it as one long string like this. The good news is if you need to enter data as JSON, you can do that in a separate text file that has a .json extension. And you can structure it like you would a JavaScript object. So you can use the returns and the tabs so that you can see how it is supposed to be structured. And we'll take a look at that in more detail in the next topic. Now, one more slide before we finish this movie, and that is the values. So when you have a name value pair, what values can those values be? What data types are available? For example, in a JavaScript object, a value can be of data type function. Well, that's not possible in JSON, as you can expect. These are the data types that are available. String, and if it is a string, it needs to be in double quotes. So important to remember. So not only does the name need to be in double quotes, but the value, if it's a string, needs to be in double quotes. A number, an object, and you use curly braces to indicate that. An array, and you use square brackets for that. A Boolean, and finally, null. As you can see, we cannot represent undefined in JSON. We can represent null, but not undefined. So that's the basics of JSON. Okay, let's move on to the next topic.